question for the community. Welcome, Carlos. So, Amos, Lucas, Carlos, do any of you currently use Orchestrator, or is this something that you're looking into using? Is something that you've deployed yet or haven't deployed? What's your experience?
So we're using Orchestrator. I think I've actually met you at the last conference. I'm Amos. I was in the code. What is it? The code
The Cotilla Hackathon?
hackathon. There it is.
Okay.
So I'm the one who came up with that hashing code to.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
you see hashing keyword. Yes, 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 yes. Where I was like,
But
oh, dude, that's a major part. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, we use Orchestrator at Moffett quite a bit actually in doing some automation with server builds.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah, server
Thanks.
builds it's a default practice, I think, for VRO. But if you will guys stay until the end, you will probably get a chance to. I'm going to share something interesting, which is not really standard. And we'll glad for any feedback later on.
Yeah, sounds
Perfect.
awesome.
What's up, Dale?
Hey, Frankie, how are you today?
That's sexy as always. And shout out Waldemar. Yeah, he was a huge help during the study group, jumping in there because we had with the questions from the community that were coming in on the chat, and it was beautiful, man, to have the interaction, right? How we were talking about, Leo, right, with the community here, people actually asking questions, and like you can tell that they're involved versus just like, man, I got to be in this meeting, kind of feeling. So yeah, no, Waldemar did a great job of supplying the links and being in there. It's amazing how many people have questions about NSX. And so that was, Waldemar being the NSX guru is perfect.
Thank you, Frankie. Yesterday in the night, I delivered a BMAC from the people from Buenos Aires and talking about certification, talking about the study group. So promote, and again, so the people missing the live record session, the recording, okay, you possible you go to the playlist in the YouTube to take in the session, and also invite to the people to taking in Discord study group to starting to see. So that this is the idea in that case. What promotion? The initiative is just one moment taking, and for me it's no problem taking. It's usual in the BMAX session, especially in Latam, taking the space, don't invite me, but starting to Q&A to the people because it's normally some people speak and you see the question. So for me, it's no problem to help to the people focus in the presentation and maybe taking my time to question and answer. It's okay. Thank you, Frankie.
No, thank you. Huge. All right, so let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining. This is the VMware Code Hour. Let's call it VMware Code Hour. And what these are calls. I'm trying to hold these monthly. I'm actually going to hold another call in 2 weeks with another individual from within Broadcom that is a product manager, I believe, of this product, the VCF Orchestrator. But what these calls are meant to be, right? They're meant to show off the community, right? Individuals like Leo that are already doing the work. Leo, if you haven't checked out his blog posts, they're pretty in depth, right? Those are pretty in depth blog posts that he writes, and this is all about getting started. And just any questions that the community may have, right? Please post them in the chat or unmute yourself. Leonid, or Leo as he likes to be called, or people call him. He said he doesn't mind. So please, we want to keep this just a lively conversation if possible. We're recording this. This will be put over on YouTube later on so other people can enjoy it and hopefully learn something from this. One of Leo's latest blog post that he wrote was scheduling. I believe it was about scheduling a snapshot with Orchestrator. Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So and then that right there, I was like, oh, okay, perfect. You see, like to me, when you're in charge and you're doing a whole bunch of things, and you want to look for like, hey, just give me something, give me a small example. And when I looked at the blog post, it wasn't a small example, but I was like, okay, at least the task itself is small, and okay, now I can connect one on one and get the party started here. So I'll be quiet and let's hand off the mic to Leo. Yeah, thank you very much, Leo.
Thank you very much, Frankie. Hey guys, thank you very much for being here. And first, again, my appreciation for Frankie and to Broadcom for that opportunity. I'm going to do that for the very first time, so I hope it's not going to be so bad. So let's begin. So agenda for today, it's not going to be so long. It's a couple of words about me, a couple of words about the evolution of Orchestrator itself. We will try to do some basic demo. And we will talk about some advanced things, which we may be going to be more interested, and some examples, and a few projects I'm working currently, and my final thoughts about the project. As Frankie mentioned before, please free to stop me at any slide or any word I'm saying for questions, no problem at all. So let's start. About me. So I'm Leo and I'm 39 years old. I started my career a bit more than 30 years ago as a junior sysadmin. You know, did everything: storage, networking, Active Directory, VMware backup, printers, replaced keyboards, everything. And I always have been curious about the technology since, ZX Spectrum, probably majority of you guys know about. And my first met with VMware was in one of the corridors for one of the customers, with standing on a side HP Gen 1 server, which was running vSphere 4.1, and that was my first hi to it. And a couple of years later on, when I moved to work in enterprises, I kind of quickly realized that it's almost impossible to manage high or big scale distributed infrastructure manually. And at the time, I was managing about a bit more than 15,000 servers and 50 vCenters. Actually, it was 51 across the globe. And the conclusion I got, it was, yeah, we have to automate it. It's not possible. And a couple of years later on, I started to play with VCF 2.0 beta, and I think it was one of the first installations in the world when VMware started to push this project as a private cloud or hybrid cloud deployment. And there I met the first time the vRealize, it's called back at the time, VMware Automation and Orchestration. I started with 6, and today we are running version 8. So I went through all these upgrades, migrates. You probably know what I'm talking about. And since I started to work on that, I got my passion to automation because of VRO. And when I started to work with VRO for the very first time, I got two feelings at the same time. One of them was passion, and I think the second one was, hey, it's something strange going on here. It's not so easy. So let's talk about the VCF Orchestrator itself. Sorry, I'm calling that VRO. I probably will continue to call it VRO. I cannot change. It will take time. So VCF Orchestrator beginning. In the early releases, the VRO was actually, even today, it was part of VRA, and it was kind of giant product. It has a Linux appliances and many Windows servers, and many dependencies, endless amount of load balancers, which you need to configure in a specific way, and if not, it will not work. If you want a cluster setup, it was triple complicated, but it was a beast. And back at the time, I think there were no competitors in that area, at least. Yeah, hello, Jenkins. and especially products which are tightly coupled to VMware infrastructure. This was the guy. And as I mentioned, yeah, it did support the clustered setup, and I think that majority of enterprises did install it in the clustered setup because you want the redundancy. The workflows were running 24/7, and standalone was not so reliable. Back at the time, it was it's offered and kind of intuitive, visual workflow designer. We will see in a minute. And one of the big advantages was that it was supporting the multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments. Again, no competitors in that area in the back time, I think. The orchestrator itself in that context has a quite nice Java client and was friendly and did the job, and you can see on a screenshot. It came with many pre-built workflows and actions we will see later on, which were actually covering majority of the use case back in the time because it was tightly coupled to VMware. So mostly daily things which any engineer was doing were here. Restart VMs and power on, power off, snapshots, and so on. So it was quite nice, but I quickly realized that it was going slower and slower when the workflow themselves were bigger and bigger. And since the VRA 8 was introduced, it was completely redesigned from scratch and simplified. And here, for example, we can see that first of all, it was moved to Kubernetes instead of old-fashioned Windows and Linux services. So here, for example, one instance of VRA running Kubernetes inside the Photon OS, and each services of VRA is actually containers, so there are dozens of them. And Orchestrator was here on the right side, was a part of this company. And Orchestrator actually, since version 8, brought many missing features, which were really missing in 6 and in VRA 6 and 8, 6 and 7, like Git integration, which was one of the highly requested features, I think, and modern HTML UI, so no more old-fashioned Java clients, and modern REST API, because now we can finally trigger VRO workflows and actions over the REST API. And it finally supports normal RBAC, where we can give people different permissions to only execute workflows, for example, or to develop them. And one of the coolest feature ever is a custom forum, my favorite one. And many more, of course, but all those coming as part of the VRA and VRO 8. In addition, it started support PowerShell and Python in addition to basic JavaScript. It was supported from the very beginning, which I think both were highly requested as well. But from the other side, the VRO itself stays mostly the same product like it was in a core a couple of years before. Yeah, the GUI was changed and the features were added, but the core of VRO stays the same. Let's jump to the basics, and I had some a hands-on lab prepared here, so I want to show you guys what's going on in the live environment so we can build some things together. And please feel free to stop me if I'm going to be boring. I'm connected to hands-on lab to VMware Orchestrator, and this is a basic view. Actually, we have a dashboard here which shows what's going on. On the left-hand side, we have different menus. For example, we are going to work on the workflows and actions, which those two guys are majority of time I'm going to spend here. Some activities like which workflows we're running, and we can schedule workflows and some policies and packages, which workflows are coming from, actually. VRO allows to provide and build configurations, packages where we can consume them in the workflow themselves. I will show it later, and so on, so on, so on. And here we can see the Git integrations and inventory for different objects we are adding to VRO to manage. For example, if a VRO connected to vCenter, to consume the resources from the vCenter. So here we can see that, hey, we have one instance, can be more than one, and we can see what exactly VRO can see, all the hosts and the VMs, and so on, so on, so on, so on. But let's start from the workflow, because this is a more interesting part. So VRO, as I mentioned before, comes with many pre-built, predefined workflows. And if we change the view here to the tree one, we can see there's a bunch of folders here. Each one of them has workflow on different topics, the REST and AMQP and Microsoft, SSH, vCenter, and so on. So we can use them out of the box without actually any knowledge, no need any knowledge for development. But we are here to learn, so let's create a new workflow. Let's call it demo and see what's going. Let's see what's going on inside. When we are creating the workflow for the very first time, it generates an ID on the fly. It has a version. It's 000 by default because it's the first one. We can provide some description, and it has a few tabs here which are quite important. The first one is variables, where we can create static or dynamic variables which can be reused later on in the workflow itself. We can create inputs for a workflow, and we will create one. When we will consume workflow, we can provide values for those inputs. Schema. Here we are going to start to build our workflow, and all the guys here, like run, debug, and schedule, we will use them later on once we will start to work. So Canvas, this is a default place where all the workflows are starting from. And here on the left side, we can see different predefined, pre-built elements which can be used during this development. The basic one and the generic one called Scriptable task. As you can see, we can just drag and drop them to the canvas, and automatically we have a context view of that particular scriptable task. We can see the name, and it can be changed to any name you want. We can provide the descriptions. And as you can see here, there is a scripting tab where we actually can write the code. In the drop down here, the VRO allows us to choose a language or a compiler we want to use, and the default is the JavaScript. For example, I can print to the console when the workflow will run, hi. Let's make it a bit more interesting. Let's create a workflow input. By default, is generating some name. We can provide a description and change type. Types can be different, can be string, can be number, can be many types which VRO has. But let's put string as a default for default. Now we have input. What we can do with that input? We can bind this input to our scriptable task, and our scriptable task will put to the console whatever we are writing in the input. In order to do that, we need to go to the context of the scriptable task, go to the inputs, and just select our input. Now we can use this input inside our code, and now system log will print to the console, if we will run it, whatever we will put as a value inside our input. Let's test it. Let's run our workflow. As immediately we can see we have one input called input 0, and there is a value we can provide. Say hi. Now we can run our workflow. In the downside here, we can see different details about our workflow, execution ID, when the workflow was started, ended, status. who runs the workflow? Our variables, we can see that workflow was running with a variable called in0, and the value was high and type was string. And in our logs, we can see high. So that it did exactly what we want. Let's continue. We can drag another one. And in that time, we can choose, for example, it does not have to be everyone have to be JavaScript. It can be PowerShell. By default, it's generating some functions which expected to get inputs and context. Let's save it, run it, and see what will happen. We have one for JavaScript and one for PowerShell. We still can see high in the logs, but why? We just provide two scriptable tasks. What happened? The second one, we forgot to add an input. So this scriptable task actually does nothing. It's here, but because it does not have any inputs and any outputs, it's do nothing. In order to make it work, we need to bind our input to that scriptable task as well. And now this input will come to the function as an input, and it will put the string input strings here in the right host. So we are expecting to get in our logs inputs were and our input high. Let's do it again. Now we can see in a second, it's running every 10 seconds. Two outputs, one high from the first scriptable task, and the second one is coming from our PowerShell, say, hey, inputs were, input name, and our high. So this option provides to combine different scriptable tasks which can run different things in different languages, which is a huge flexibility. Let's see on the left side what else we have here. For example, we have a generic element called decision. Decisions allow us to say if else. If something will happen, go to the next element on a canvas. But if not, just end the execution. If we select the decision element, we scroll down, we can see that there is a piece of code which can be executed. And actually decision, we can decide in a code what that will do. For example, we can see, well, we can say, first of all, let's bind our input to that decision element. And here we can see if input 0 will be high, return true, means continue to the next element, means to that scriptable task. But if not, return false. Oh, sorry, return false. So we can do this logic as a code, which is super flexible. Let's save it and run it again. But in order to make sure it's working, let's add another scriptable task here, which will just put as a console, didn't work. So we can test both scenarios. Run. Hi. It's not defined. What happened? Oh, it's a string. Thank you very much. Save, run. Hi. Logs, cool. Because the input was high and we checked that it's really high, we did continue and end the workflow. But let's try it again. and execute something else. At that time, the workflow was not running to the right side of the workflow, but it goes down and say, hey, it didn't work. So it did exactly what we are expecting to do. So all of those elements allows us to create an enormous amount of logic to our workflows and build whatever we want as we want. Another cool guy here, if we scroll down, we have much more elements here, called, for example, the sleep. We can drag and drop it here and say, click on it and see that it's expecting to get the input, which is number in seconds, for if we want to pause or sleep our workflow for any reason. In order to do that, we have to create a variable called sleep time, but it can be any name of type number, and provide a value. Let's provide number 2, which will mean that it will wait for 2 seconds. Save it. Run it again. Write hi here and run. So now we are expecting to sleep for 2 seconds, and we can see it took exactly 2 seconds, and our workflow executed as well as expected. So all those elements on the right side of the scheme can be dragged to the canvas, and allows us to build any logic we want. Okay. Input form allows to take the inputs of variables and customize them. For example, we can change input called in0, not really a meaningful name. We can call it, for example, VM name. Okay, so input ID will stay the same, but a person who will execute it will know that we are talking about the VM, so it's much more user-friendly. So now if we will save it and run it again, now it's not called anymore input 0, but it's called VM name. So labels provide an option to provide a meaningful for the inputs we are running. Version history allows to restore and see what was changed and compare against the current or any other version of this workflow. So any change I'm doing and I'm saving it as it's stored, and we can restore, revert back and see what was changed if we did something wrong, and we can revert it back. And in terms of audit, of course, we can see who did and what did, just in case we want to troubleshoot it for any reason. Any questions until now?
We do have somebody here. Sorry. So I may not be saying your name correctly. Mayank. They asked if we can touch on dynamic types / object, what they are and use cases.
So dynamic types. So VRO is not like a TypeScript, which is object. JavaScript does not really have strict types. VRO provide a framework which allows to. Sorry for the delay. It's running over the internet. Yeah. So allows to create types for any object we have in the system. For example, in vCenter we have a VM. VMware developers create a type of object called virtual machine, and this allows later on in a code to JavaScript to understand that the object I got has a type VC virtual machine, and because of that, it has many properties which are related to that type, and based on that, we can decide what we can do. Dynamic type features allows to create our own types. For example, we can develop workflow which use our types which are not coming out of the box, and we can bind between them and create a whole structure exactly like VMware does. It's quite complicated, I would say. It's not straightforward task to do, but this option, it's a cool feature, by the way, provides this flexibility if you want to develop something your own, by your own, and you do not have predefined types for that. Dynamic types provide you an option to build these types and use them, bind them to the objects and use them later on in a code.
Is
Sorry,
it
go ahead.
possible to just show a demo of creating a dynamic type?
No, unfortunately not. Not because we do not have time, and it's super. It's quite complicated. It will not take hour. It's really complicated topic. We maybe can make another session for that, but it's not something that you can drag and drop to the canvas and just start to do it.
Okay, another session should be great.
Yeah, probably. So let's jump to a bit more advanced things. When I started with VRA 7 more than 6, I kind of quickly realized that its potential, it's especially the self-service catalog portal, where I start to think that, hey, we can expose to the customers actually anything we wanted. We have to start to do that. But in order to make it work, I have to learn scripting languages. I have to learn coding. So I started to play around to learn in JavaScript because back at the time, it was a default. And here on the right side, you can see an example, one of the workflows I worked on a couple of years ago. And when you're developing a workflows in such scale, I quickly realized you can see the limits very quick. For example, in that particular workflow, they are doable, but it's pretty challenging. In that one, it has more than 100 inputs and variables, and just to load it, it took more than 30 seconds, sometimes in minutes, because it was reading many things from different places. Another thing I quickly realized that GUI, when you are developing workflows in such scale, is not really designed for that. I mean, you cannot maintain it or even add anything or troubleshoot it. It's challenging. So VRO brought VRO 8 quite substantial performance improvement comparing to VRO 7, sorry. And the GUI still, even in VRO 8, not designed for big workflows. But VMware Area Build Tools, which was released to the public a couple of years ago, actually allows to use VS Code to developing any workflows or any automation at any scale. And lesson learned. So now it is possible, as you can see on the screenshot, one of the actions I did develop, create a code which is literally normal, beautiful, standardized code and reduce amount of elements in a canvas. It's not always the case, but it allows to do that, means as a VRO itself, jumping up and provide much more value than it was before, because before doing something like that, you can see on the screenshot, was really challenging. Let's take an example. I have a recorded video here, so I'm going to stop it and explain what's going on. For example, we have a workflow called host profile, which is supposed to check and allows the user to apply different host profiles to E6i servers. Let's run it. And let's see what's going on here. So first of all, we have input called E6i host, which where we need to select the E6i we want to work on. We have attached host profile field. You know what? Let's run it and see what's going on. I will explain once we will see the data. So let's select one of the E6s. For example, E6i02. Once it's selected, automatically, even before we are starting to run this workflow, pay attention, we can see that this particular E6 has profile 2 attached to it already. So we know it's a very valuable data. Now the next field, I can see automatically fetch drop-down box show us which profiles are applicable to be applied to that particular host. And we have two. If we will select the second one, which is already applied, automatically on the fly, we can fetch the details about this workflow because the name is not really convenient. So we have a table here which shows us the status of this profile, and it's ready to use. And the profile description says, hey, this profile number 2 is actually profile for vSAN hosts. Let's say that in our example, this particularly 602 needs to be moved from vSAN cluster to another cluster. Let's see what's going on with the profile number 1. And in profile number 1, we can see, hey, this profile is ready to use, but this one is a profile for VDI cluster. And once this profile is selected, here we can see another inputs which were not exist before, were not visible, which force us, which forced us to provide mandatory inputs to that particular profile, which are mandatory to be applied. Once we will provide the hostfqdn subnet and IP address, and we'll execute this workflow, it will assign this profile to that particular ESX. So here we can see a couple of elements which are a bit more advanced. For example, we can see fetching values on the fly, like attached host profile or drop-down, which show us which profiles exist at all. We can see a table here, which we're populating with the values on the fly, and it's refreshed on the fly based on the profile is selected. And we can see different elements which appears or disappears based on the profile, and have to be provided because there is an asterisk here, and they are a mandatory inputs. So this is a cool example of what can be done with VRO, so much more advanced.
My question here, when applying a host profile, can I, instead of selecting a single host, can I select a cluster and then it'll go do and remediate the host? Or is this like you're doing a brand new one?
Yeah, so you can. This particular workflow was designed, so I designed and developed it for one particular use case. Apply or change, so request was apply or change host profile per E6. So the user should select the specific E6 and change the profile based on that needs. Of course, it's possible, instead of E6i host here, select cluster, but the logic behind the scene will be get all E6s in that cluster and one by one apply that particular host. Definitely can be done. No, that was not a request in that particular one, but of course it can be done. So 2 current projects I'm working on right now, and they're quite interesting, for me at least. The first one is a VM tools upgrade. You may be wondering what can be so complex in VM tools upgrade, right? Just do next and mount the tools, do next, and that's all, that's done. But as you can see on the right side of the diagram, it can be challenging if we want to make it automated. We are here because orchestrated, right? So we want to automate everything and not do next. In order to automate VM tools upgrade, it can be done easily, but I'm thinking that the workflow, at least I'm developing, it must be bulletproof workflows. And Orchestrator allows us to build such kind of workflows. This is a solution for that. It's just only a matter of how much bulletproof I want this, or my implementation, my workflows will be. And as much bulletproof it will be, means more and more checks and best practices should be implemented in that particular workflow. For example, we can say, okay, there is a VM. I need to install or update VM tools, but the VM can be template, right? If I'm running my workflow in Orchestrator without opening and checking the vCenter, what is the status of the VM, what's going on with that, which type of operating system is that, I just want to click on run workflow. I do not care for anything else, right? This is the point of bulletproof. So I need to know if the VM is a template or not. And if it's a template, I need to convert it to the VM, run upgrade, convert it back to the VM, because back to the template, because it was template before. And if VM is powered off, I need to power it on, upgrade VM tools, and power it off because it was powered off, right? And if VM has persistent disks, it has snapshot, it has many, many, many different scenarios. As you can see, many ifs and else and yes and no on the right side. All this allows us to build a bulletproof VM tools upgrade workflow, which is fire and forget. You just run it, select the VM, and workflow will take for the rest, right? So you will get your VMs exactly in that state like it was before. If I wouldn't care about anything I just mentioned before, like check it if it's template or not, or check it if it's powered off or not, the operator, which is actually triggering the workflow and in most cases does not have an access to the vCenter at all, will start the workflow, will pick up a VM, and workflow will fail a couple of seconds later on because VM is a template and you cannot upgrade tools on template, right? So this person will probably contact someone from the VMware engineers and tell, hey, convert it please to me to the VM and I will do it again. So these ping pongs can be prevented, and Orchestrator allows us to do that. It's only a matter how much time you want to invest in developing such kind of workflows, but it's definitely doable. And the second one, yeah. So before, example of the lessons learned from the previous slide, that learning curve is something that it's mandatory probably when you work with Orchestrator. And when you work with it more and more, it allows us to optimize the code and instead to create a couple of simple scriptable tasks, create much more deeper logic like you can see here. So I just took this, I first of all drew this schema. I just told to myself, okay, what I want to do. And after that, I started to convert it to the code. And sometimes we can convert the logic into the code instead of using multiple elements on the canvas, like I mentioned before, because it's going to be more and more robust on a canvas and not readable, not usable, not maintainable. It's not always the case, but it can be. And therefore, the complex logic on the previous diagram looks like that. For example, you can see here. So if the initial power state of the VM was not powered on, first of all, power on the VM, right? After that, check the status of the VM tools. Maybe their status is invalid or not installed at all. After that, run the upgrade, and after the upgrade, validate the tools are up and running. Not just upgrade, but I want to confirm that my upgrade was completed successful, right? How I can do that? Check the status of the tools. Another example, if operator asks for set VM upgrade policy, there is a feature. If it was requested, do it. And if initial power state was power off, handle power on and power off the VM. And if it was suspended, for example, okay, power it on, make an upgrade, make it back to be suspended. So all those use cases have to be concluded if we want to make bulletproof solutions. And this is not a bad example for doing that. And Orchestrator really allows us to build such kind of fire and forget workflows, which makes a whole infrastructure much more reliable. Any question related to that before we'll jump to the last one?
Yes, let me go ahead and read it out. So for the update of the open for the update of the open VMware tools in Linux OS, how could they be updated only from the OS repositories, or is it possible for us to update with a new version with the orchestrator?
Yeah, so there's two ways to install VM tools for Linuxes, either from ISO, which provided by VMware, so we need to install it, attach it to the VM, run a couple of commands like mount this ISO and do whatever is written in the step-by-step guide. Or I think it's which is much more preferable and easy to do, is to use open VM tools, which are allows us to do exactly the same without manipulating with attaching and mounting ISOs. The idea of logic we can see here is exactly the same. So you still want to check if VM is template, or Linux VM, for example, is template or not, right? So the logic applied is the same. The only difference is in a function here, for example, which called upgrade VM tools, which is literally doing the upgrade. So in case of Linux, the function will connect to the Linux OS and will trigger or will execute the upgrade of OpenVM tools itself. It's based on what is Linux administrators allows to do. For example, it can be bind to specific version, or we need to update repository first, or many different scenarios. But once it's confirmed from the Linux administrators, which are maintaining the operating system, our side, from orchestrator side, is relatively easy. We just running a couple of commands which does a job. It's exactly the same, like for Windows's, and we will handle we will revert VM to the original state when it was before. So just implementation of this function upgrade VM tools can be checked. If can check if VM is Linux or Windows. If it's Linux, do ABC. If it's Windows, do DEF. But the structure of the code will be the same.
When I was a customer, our Linux admins, we always used open VM tools. We never actually, it was one less step. So
yeah, exactly. Well, more than one, I would say.
Yeah, is it possible? And I know Waldemar. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think Waldemar already answered the question, and he provided some documentation in there. But he was asking if you can install VM tools or upgrade VM tools on the Linux without requiring a reboot or without interrupting services.
Yeah. So on that diagram, one of the blocks were the workflow itself. When it started, there is a checkbox says, or I am asking the operator if you want to reboot VM immediately if required, or you want to postpone it. So if you select this checkbox, it will reboot it by default. If not, it can be postponed, and you will reboot it whenever, anytime you want later on. So this is another out-of-the-box thinking for bulletproof workflows, where we can think how we can improve the reliability of our infrastructure by asking as much more questions we can ask for the operator from one side, but from other side, reduce amount of questions if we know already the answer, and not overhead by ask stupid questions if I can automate it in a code without it asking anything. But yeah, this option is available. Again, it's available because I did implemented that. But code and tools are allows to do that. Yeah, it definitely can be done.
But thank you very much, Leo.
And the last one, I'm finishing and working right now, called Datacenter energy saving. There is a request to reduce amount of energy which our data center is consuming. One of the biggest consumers of energy in each data center, I would guess, those are HPC clusters, and we have more than 100 HPC nodes with multiple GPUs inside each node. And currently, the cluster is consuming about 1 megawatt hour. So I thought that it may be possible to reduce amount of power this cluster is consuming. And by playing with CPU clocks and GPU powers. So on the diagram on the right side, you can see that a simple logic of what's going on, of what I'm doing. So first of all, we have HPC nodes which are or Intel-based or AMD-based, right? So I need to first of all to detect the CPU architecture. After that, I need to get the current CPU clocks and power GPU power consumption of both CPUs and GPUs. And after that, I need to run for each server I have in a cluster, and we have more than 100, my logic. So I need to prepare the numbers, whatever I want to do, I will explain in a second. And in case of if I need to downscale the CPU and GPU clocks or upscale based if I want to improve or decrease the power consumption of the cluster. I dare to use the orchestrator out of the VMware context, because as you probably know, orchestrator mostly tied coupled to VMware infrastructure. Here in that particular example, there is no VMware infrastructure at all, nothing. It's also physical servers which are running Linux. And I thought if I can use it to achieve this goal. It worked. And on the right side of the slide, you can see the output from the orchestrator. First of all, I can know what is the current power consumption of my HPC cluster. And we can see it's 100K, right? It's 1 megawatt. Means I need to decrease. So we have a limit for upper and lower. So we have two limits, upper and lower. If the cluster consuming more than 80K or start to decrease, and if it's going below to 50, for example, start to increase. So we are consuming 100, and the minimum limit was 55. So we're going to decrease our CPU frequencies. We have 170 nodes in a cluster, so I'm going to proceed on 170 nodes. This is example from node number 5. Because all the nodes are Linuxes, I need to use SSH plugin, right? Connect with SSH to each one of them. Get my stats, as I mentioned before. So for example, I can see that output from CPU and GPU frequencies are, and those are frequencies which are returning me that particular server, the current CPU utilization, and those three guys here are the supporting increasing steps. So those are only 3 CPU speed clocks I can jump between, and the current is 1500, and I cannot decrease less, but if I will increase, those are only the options I have. And I have 8 GPU cards installed in that particular server. So CPU frequency details on server 1. The current frequency is 1.5 gigs. The maximum is 2, and number of GPUs 8. I am working on AMD node, and I'm going to decrease it because we are running on 100,000 watts. As you can see, the log says me that CPU frequency is already at minimum because I'm running on 1.5 gigahertz, and the minimum is 1.5 gigahertz. So I cannot lower it, but I can lower the GPU power consumption. So I'm starting to do that. And here in the logs, I can see that maximum power consumption of this GPU is 250 watts. The current power consumption is 190. So I can decrease it, and the minimum one is 150. I cannot go below that, exactly like with the CPU. So I start to decrease it for GPU number 0, and I have 8 of them. So I need to do a loop for each. And in logs, I can see, so the decreasing of decreasing of power for GPU 0 was decreased from 190 to 180 on that particular server. And I'm going to do it one by one for each 8 GPUs and that particular server on each one of 170 servers. For my humble opinion, this is an amazing example of how we can think out of the box and get Orchestrator to the next level when we can control and automate things which are out of the VMware scope at all, but it still can provide an amazing value where we can improve our data centers, we can control different products, and it will allow us to scale the orchestrator to different areas, not only to VMware. I made it, I work on that. It's almost done for a couple of months. It's thousands of lines of code in JavaScript, but it's working. And for the first couple of months, we were able to save about 10 megawatts of energy. So it's going to continue to run, I hope. Of course, I learned a lot during development of that things and a lot of issues I discovered, but it's doable and it's working. And I'm so excited about that it's really applicable use case for Orchestrator as well.
Excellent. Next question. How are you manipulating GPU and CPU consumption?
In a Linux world, Linux drivers allows to control the CPU clock. And here, for example, you can see output of the command I'm running through the SSH on each Linux server, which returns me what are the CPU clock speeds are supported to change by that particular driver. Here, I can jump between 1.5 gigahertz, 1.8, and 2 gigs. So I can send a command over the SSH and say to CPU, please set your current clock to be now 1.8 gigahertz, and driver allows to do that. So that allows me to increase or decrease the speed, which allows to increase or decrease the power consumption. In case of GPUs are not changing the speed, they are changing the power. So I can, in our case, it was NVIDIA GPUs, so I can tell through the NVIDIA SMI to each GPU, please set your current power consumption to be, and it can be between 250 watts for that particular GPU, between 250 and 150. So I can jump at any power in that particular range. We decided to jump in the steps of 10, so 150, 160, 170. But first of all, you need to get the limits, and after that, you need to calculate your steps, right? So if you current consumption is in that example 190. If it's going down, you need to know to decrease it by 10, and if it's going up, you need to know to increase it by 10. I wrote the functions for that, which are doing this math, or they are getting as inputs. If it's going to be increased, so run the function which calculates the next step. You can see it here, I mentioned it, right? Calculate the next step. And the next step is based on if it's going to up or down. But both GPUs and CPUs allows to do that. It's only a matter of just digging to see how to do that, and execute the proper commands, parse them, get the values, and make the logic, which is the crucial part here, what to do with the value you are getting.
So Daniel asked, as a follow-up to this, can the vCPU frequency be adjusted on the fly to increase or decrease it?
vCPU, not sure. In that particular case, there is no VMware involved at all. Those are bare metal servers running native bare metal Linux. No VMware, no vCPUs, no virtualization. Those are pure bare metal servers. I do not know to answer right now if it's possible with code to connect, to tell to E6i to change the CPU clock, or maybe with via IP or iLOS, iDRAX, IP mice, whatever. I cannot know to answer right now. I never did it before. I can answer any questions related to that because I spent half a year on that, but nothing related to virtual anything, because it's pure bare metal infrastructure.
Cool. Yeah.
I mean,
So
my goal was to get Orchestrator out of the VMware context and see if it's going to be working or not, and it is. Yeah. So, for final thoughts, that my first months with an Orchestrator were super frustrating, right? It's not an easy product, and I have tested plenty of other Orchestrator styles products. Some of them were okay, some of them are not so, but I always end up to coming back to VRO, as you can see. And I think that switching from Windows monolithic one and Windows servers to microserver architecture was a very smart move. No doubt, it's definitely worth it. And VRO 8 has really cool features like custom forms. We talked briefly. You probably will never find in any other place. It's really amazing. But from other side, there is a learning curve, which when adopting it, and sometimes it's seriously considered before deciding to work on that, because it's not a product where you can just install and start to work on that, right? It's a complicated one. And the chances of success are high if you have right team, right? And as I mentioned, preferably for more than one person. I saw it before. And end users will appreciate for self-service things. It's amazing. And the management will love seeing infrastructure maintained as a code. It's a win-win for all of us. As a last example, I showed we can do even more than just maintain on the VMware infrastructure with VRO. So the use cases are endless.
I love that you're showing things that are outside of the VMware realm, right? Where you can automate, and it's super cool that you can drop in all those tasks and speak different languages with every single one. And I feel that would be crazy, impossible, or really, really hard to do if you were doing everything in just a simple script that you have to constantly run.
Because I saw that I will give it a try to share my passion to the product and see if people going to like it or not, because it's quite technical and maybe quite boring for someone, because I'm just improving my writing skills, and I will give it a chance. And if so, I will continue. If not a problem. I did try, and it's nice experience in general. And the year in 2 months later, we are here. So I hope it will continue to work if someone will need it. I'm exactly like you, so because I'm like it so much, a couple of hours here and couple of nights over there and some evenings. And the problem is that, I mean, it's not a problem, but the reason for making it so big sometimes is just not an article where you are sharing some idea maybe, but in my case, I'm trying to share the working code as well. It's mean I need to write it, I need to test it, I need to make sure it's working, and only after that, on top of that, I'm starting to write and explain the logic. So it's both the text and the code, because without the code, it was quite simple relatively, but because I want to provide a working code that people can download and just install directly in VRO, and they will get a working workflows. And I got some feedback from people which are saying, hey, it's working nicely. Thank you very much for that. So this is much more work than literally writing sentences in a blog. This takes time, I have to say, maybe 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, just to make things working. I appreciate for that opportunity. Thanks a lot. And for your time, guys. It was amazing.
Excellent. And again, this was Leo's very first time presenting. So Let's give it up. So super awesome. Thank you very much. I want to thank you. Thank you very much. Right, this has been super fun, right? And starting from the very first example, right? Yeah, the elements were on the left-hand side, and then you have your canvas and everything like that, right? Just when you first log in and you see everything, it's like, oh my gosh, look at all this, right? It's like you walk into a kitchen and it's like a fully fledged kitchen with everything going on, all the different ovens, the different burners, the different refrigerators and stuff. It's just too much. And so, yes, just to break it down, right, into little pieces like this, it's like, okay, yeah, no, this is perfect. And like I can start understanding and consuming and getting ideas. Now this is great. And yes, definitely, if Leo, you can come back and demo anything else. As you can see, like this is very interesting, very interesting to people. It's a mix of people here in the crowd, in the virtual crowd, that have used this, that have this implemented, and some that are just wanting to learn. So thank you very much for coming. And excellent. Yeah, feel free to reach out if we can help with anything, or if you want to learn anything else. Yeah, just let us know. We're always here. Thank you.
Thank you.